Cowboy helped a starving native. Right then, 200 warriors lined up outside his barn. The cowboy had learned long ago that the land did not care about a man's past, only whether he could endure its silence, and so he lived where silence was thick enough to bury memories, on a stretch of dry frontier where the wind cut like a blade and the sun burned every lie away. His ranch was nothing special, one weather-beaten barn, a modest house built with his own hands, and a well that groaned like an old man each time water was drawn, but it was his, earned with sweat and solitude. Folks in the nearest town barely spoke his name anymore. Some said he was dangerous, others said broken, and most simply said nothing at all. What none of them knew was that he had once been part of a world louder than gunfire, where orders were screamed and mercy was weakness, and he had walked away from it carrying ghosts heavier than any rifle. On this evening, as the sun slid low and painted the sky the color of dried blood, the cowboy was finishing his chores when he noticed something unnatural near the far fence line. At first, he thought it was a fallen log or a wounded animal, but then it moved, just slightly, and instinct tightened his chest. He reached for his rifle, not out of fear, but habit, and approached slowly, boots crunching over dry earth. What he found stopped him cold. A native man lay collapsed in the dust, skin stretched tight over bone, lips split and bleeding, eyes barely able to stay open. Hunger had hollowed him out so deeply that he looked less like a man and more like a shadow struggling to remain attached to the world. The cowboy stood there for a long moment, the old stories flooding his mind, the warnings, the hatred, the bloodshed whispered about in saloons and shouted during drunken nights. He could turn away. Many would have. It would have been easier. Safer. But something inside him, something forged in places far worse than this, refused to let him walk away from a man dying at his feet. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his rifle, knelt beside the stranger, and offered him water, a few careful drops at a time. The native man flinched at first, expecting cruelty, but thirst overpowered fear, and he drank. The cowboy spoke no threats, made no demands. He lifted the man, lighter than a sack of grain, and carried him to the barn, laying him on clean hay, wrapping him in a spare blanket, and feeding him broth so slowly that the night itself seemed to hold its breath. Hours passed. The fire crackled. The cowboy stayed awake, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall, remembering another night long ago when he himself had lain wounded and alone, praying for footsteps that never came. Just before dawn, the native man finally opened his eyes fully, sharp despite weakness, studying the cowboy with suspicion and confusion tangled together. He expected questions. He expected chains. Instead, he got silence and another careful offering of water. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough but steady, warning the cowboy that saving him might bring consequences worse than death. The cowboy met his gaze and answered simply that no man deserved to be left to die in the dirt. When the sun rose, the native man stood, strength slowly returning, and before leaving, he turned back once, eyes burning with something new, respect. He vanished into the hills without another word. The cowboy watched him go, unaware that mercy, once given, never travels alone. The morning came differently than all the others, not with birdsong or the soft groan of wind through dry grass, but with a deep, unfamiliar vibration beneath the cowboy's boots, a low trembling that traveled through the earth itself, as if the land were holding its breath. He stepped out of his house just as the sun cleared the horizon, and that was when he saw them. Horses, more than he could count at first, lined up in long, silent rows beyond his barn, their riders sitting tall and unmoving, faces stern, weapons visible but not raised. 200 native warriors stood there in perfect stillness, forming a wall of flesh, iron, and judgment. The cowboy did not reach for his rifle. He did not retreat. He simply stood, shoulders square, hands empty at his sides, knowing deep in his bones that this moment would decide whether his ranch became a grave or a legend. Memories of war flickered through his mind, ambushes, screams, orders shouted too late, but he forced them down. Fear would invite bloodshed, and bloodshed would invite more. He took a slow step forward, boots crunching against the dirt, letting them see that he had nothing to hide. The silence stretched, thick and dangerous, until a rider at the front moved. It was the man he had saved. No longer starving. No longer broken. He sat tall in the saddle, strength restored, eyes sharp and alive, carrying the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. He raised a hand, and the warriors remained still. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the open land, telling them how he had collapsed near death, how the cowboy could have turned away, could have let the sun finish what hunger had started, but instead chose mercy when no one was watching. He described the water given drop by drop, the food offered with care, the blanket laid without demand. Murmurs rippled through the line, disbelief mixing with curiosity. The warrior leader dismounted and walked forward alone, each step measured, eyes never leaving the cowboy's face. He circled him slowly, searching for fear, arrogance, or deceit, but found only a man who had already accepted whatever judgment was coming. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice calm but heavy with authority, saying that strength without mercy was nothing but noise, and that a man who showed kindness to an enemy without expecting reward carried a power no weapon could match. Then came the moment that would echo through generations. The leader raised his hand, and one by one, 200 warriors lowered their weapons. The tension broke like a snapped rope. What could have been fire and blood became respect and silence. The leader declared that the cowboy's land would be honored, his ranch protected, his name spoken with respect among their people. The saved man approached one final time and told the cowboy that his barn would never burn, his cattle would never be stolen, and no harm would come to him from the surrounding lands. As the warriors turned and rode away, the earth seemed to release the breath it had been holding. The cowboy stood alone again, the wind returning to its usual song, but nothing was the same. His ranch was no longer just a place of isolation, it was proof that a single act of compassion could stop an army without firing a single shot. He returned to his work, quieter than ever, knowing that mercy, once given, always finds its way back multiplied. If this story touched your heart, remember, true strength is choosing kindness when no one is forcing you to. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories where one decision changes destiny forever.